Hello everyone, welcome back to Embroidery Tutorials. We are currently on the 4th circle out of 7 of my 90 variation chain stitch sampler, and if you would like to sew along with us, you can pick up a pattern from my Etsy shop. That link is in the description. Today we are going to be doing 2 stitches, which yeah, as you saw from the title, they stumped me. Literally every time I try to do these stitches again, I have to rewatch a video of me doing it because I've forgotten. But they are such fun to master. It took me a couple times, it might take you a couple times, but I promise if you stick with it, it's gonna look awesome in the end. These are both gonna be on our little half circles here on the other side of the half moon where we did our whipped fill stitch. So let's get started. The first up is rosette stitch. You'll notice for these that I am using a thicker thread. This is a cotton pearl from DMC. I like doing these 2 stitches with a thicker thread. You could also just use all 6 strands of regular embroidery floss. Make sure you up your needle size to make it easy to draw those thicker threads through the fabric. But I use those thicker threads because, in my opinion, it just ends up looking better. You get sort of a full band of stitching here when you have a thicker thread, and when you use a thinner one, it turns out looking like very separated stitches instead of a full band. The next thing I will note is that if you try to do these stitches in another direction, it can immediately get confusing. So I recommend starting with this rosette stitch so that the wide part of your loop is facing outward, so that the skinny parts are going to be on the smaller circle, this inside circle, which has less space. I started out this sampler thinking, hey, let me try it in the other direction, and stitch the entire thing in the other direction with the wider part of the loop facing inward, and then realized why that was a bad idea. It didn't look good. So take my word for it, you want to have the wider side of that loop facing outward, which means the first place you want to come up through the fabric is going to be the inside circle, the smaller one, on the right side. And this is with that half moon facing downward, like I have it right here. So once we've come up through the fabric, we're going to go back down just a short length away on that same inside circle. Because basically the first thing that we're doing is creating a twisted chain stitch, or a twisted lazy daisy, because it's kind of going to stand on its own here. You want your twist to end up with the working thread, the one that's closest to where you came up through the fabric, being underneath. It should be kind of held down by the other side. So you can see I'm flipping my loop from left to right so that the second leg ends up on top. And then we're coming back up through the fabric on that outer line, sort of straight parallel in front of it, and going through the loop so that we've created a twisted lazy daisy. We just haven't tacked it down yet because we're not going to tack it down. So our next step is going to be to draw your needle underneath your very first leg. So that little leg sticking out where you first came through the fabric, you want to go underneath that with your thread. So what you might already be realizing is that you're just going to pull the top of your loop back down to the base, which, yes, if you pull too hard, that's exactly what will happen and you'll mess up your stitch. So the name of the game from here on out is gently. You are always pulling through very gently, because basically what this stitch is a knot on top of the fabric that you've never tightened. Same thing is going to happen with the next one, braided band stitch. It's really just a knot that is not tightened yet. That's how you get this really cool textured loopy band of thread on top of the fabric. It's really fascinating. So as you draw your needle underneath that little leg, you want to make sure that you are keeping some tension on the top of your loop there where the thread came up through the fabric, because you don't want the top of that loop to just flip up and start pulling back down towards the base. I just want to get the threads to lay where I put them. So once we've drawn that needle underneath the working leg, we've completed the first rosette stitch. That is what it is at its essence. And you can do these stitches quite separate from each other and you're going to get a completely different look, but I like them best in this sort of close together band form, so that's what I'm teaching here. So we're again going back down through the fabric just a little bit away, and we're creating that twisted lazy daisy, twisted chain stitch, whichever you want to think of it as. Again, your working leg, the one closest to your previous stitch, needs to be on the underside of your twist. So you're flipping from left to right so that your left leg of this loop is the one on top. coming up through the fabric on that outside line again. And now you do have to pull in order to get this twisted chain stitch to tighten up. But again, if you just yank your thread, you're gonna pull out what you've created in that very first stitch. So you're pulling gently just to the place where you want it to be. Once you get there, you're sliding your needle back underneath that working leg, what's connecting it to the previous stitch, and pulling very gently. Make sure you're keeping some tension at the top of that loop until the very last second. We're gonna continue doing this all the way around to the other side of this half circle, and I'm gonna go slow and show you lots of footage here so that you can keep following along. When you get to that very last stitch at the end of your half circle here, once you've drawn the needle underneath your little working leg there, you can just put it straight back down through the fabric, kind of where you are, or a little past the stitch. You're not going anywhere crazy. And that's it. You're all done with your rosette stitch. If it looks a little lumpy now, just give it another try at another point. I promise you, this one took me several tries to be able to get looking nice. And even this one, I don't think looks as nice as the last one that I did, because it just doesn't always work perfectly for you. And that's okay. We're gonna move on now. On our second half circle here, we're gonna be doing braided band stitch. This seems very similar, especially in the final product, to rosette stitch, but it actually is sewn in sort of the opposite way. You'll see what I mean. Again, these are getting to be more complex of stitches, and they're a little harder for me to verbally describe, so I'm going to be showing lots of footage nice and slow so that you can follow along. And again, I recommend going in the same direction that I'm going here when you're first learning it, and then play around with your directions later on once you've gotten the hang of it. So you can see this time we're actually going to start out, we're still on the right side of our circle here, but we're going to start out by coming through the fabric on the upper circle rather than the lower one. This is important. This is what makes it different. And the first thing we're going to do here, I'll show you a couple times, is we are creating another twisted chain stitch or another twisted lazy daisy, similar to what we did in rosette stitch, but now the working leg needs to be on top. So you can see how I use the needle to sort of create this flip. You can create it any way you want. You might find it easier to just use your hands to flip the thread around. But I found that by tucking your needle underneath your thread like this, you will automatically flip the thread and create the loop with your working leg on top and your follow-through leg underneath. And that's exactly how you need it. This is still on top of the fabric. We haven't gone through the fabric yet, because what you're going to do once you've created that flip in the loop and you have your twisted chain stitch laying on top of the fabric here, you're going to bring your needle down through the loop that you've created on the smaller side of your half circle. This is another instance where we have to kind of use this slide through method of sewing rather than the stab through. You really need to have your needle going down through the fabric and back up through the fabric at the same time before you draw it all the way through. So you've gone down on the inside circle in the middle of this loop. You can pull on your thread to tighten that loop up around your needle, and then without drawing it all the way through, you're going to come back up on your outside circle. The important thing is that you're coming back up on the outside of all of your thread. If you try to come through the center of your two legs here or anything like that, this will not work out. So you want to make sure that that leftover thread, your tail, if you will, is tucked underneath your needle as you pull it all the way through. And that's it. This one's actually kind of easier than Rosette because that's all you have to do. It's just that one movement. Again, though, I will say it again, the key here is gentleness. If you pull this really tight, you're gonna create a little knot on the top of the fabric with like legs coming out in different directions, and it doesn't come undone, and you have to snip all your threads and start over. And if it sounds like I just did this 3 times, it's because I did. So take it from me, don't yank your thread. You want to still be very gentle here. Kind of hold on to your tail all the time and create tension where you need it without having to actually yank anything tight. So that's our very first stitch of the braided band stitch, but now we're going to finish off our band by doing this over and over again all the way around our little half circle here. So once again, you're sliding your needle underneath that thread and flipping it over, or just using your hands to flip it over to create that twisted chain on top of the fabric. Nothing's gone through yet. Then your needle is going through the loop on this smaller side of the circle. It's staying there while you pull the extra thread tight around the needle. Again, not pulling too hard. And then your needle is coming back up through the fabric so that we are both down through the fabric and up through the fabric at the same time in this slide through method. And that tail is wrapping underneath your needle before you pull it all the way through. Last thing you'll do when you get to the end here is you're actually just gonna tack down your little loop here on the top. So once you've pulled your needle all the way through, just do a tiny little tacking stitch over the end of that loop and you're all done. You've mastered it. I'm sure you have. This is braided band stitch and rosette stitch. Look how awesome they look next to each other. They have such great texture here on top and they are so fun to do once you get the hang of them. So hopefully this tutorial has been nice and slow and clear enough for you to get the hang of it. If not, just give it a few more tries and I promise you will master it in no time at all. Even if you have to come back and keep checking the video every time you do this stitch, which is what I have to do because I forget how to do it every time. And that's all for today. So we will be coming back soon with another tutorial to keep moving on through circle 4. But I hope you enjoyed learning these 2 stitches that have addled my brain at times. And I hope you have been able to master them and feel proud of your accomplishments. Thanks so much for joining me today. I will see you next time.